Thanks so much for joining us tonight. As Jim said, I'm the director of the Dottie Brown Art and Nature Center here at the Peabody Essex, and also involved as the program coordinator for ECOC. And so in that hybrid role, I am very delighted to be introducing tonight's co-hosted event, Watching a Penguin Revolution with Hugh Powell. And I'm truly delighted to be introducing him to you all tonight. Although Hugh Powell is usually based in Williamstown, Mass., he is currently living in Northern Virginia for a couple of years with his young family. He works remotely as the editor of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's All About Birds website and species guide. He also writes and edits for the member magazine Living Bird and manages Cornell Lab's social media channels. Powell holds an MS from the University of Montana and a graduate certificate in science writing from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Powell says it was his father, an obsessed birder, who first introduced him to birds. He then studied ornithology in both college and graduate school, which is where he became fascinated by the value of telling stories about science to people who weren't academics. As a graduate student, Powell spent 3 summers in the Idaho wilderness, climbing and studying dead, burned trees to understand what black-backed woodpeckers eat. And after a stint as an editor at an ornithological journal, he enrolled in a science writing program that specializes in teaching journalism to scientists. Since then, science writing has taken Powell to Antarctica, South America, Africa, Iceland, and elsewhere. He still finds satisfaction in providing someone with information that sparks their own curiosity and sense of adventure, which is lucky for us, given that he is going to be telling us tonight about what scientists are learning about penguins in Antarctica during this time of great change. And so, Hugh, I am so delighted to have you here tonight and to be sharing the amazing photographs that I've gotten a glimpse of. So welcome. I am welcoming you on behalf of everyone who's here and so looking forward to this program. Oh, and I do want to mention at the end of the presentation, if you want to ask your own question, Sarah O'Connell, who is handling our Zoom technical aspects tonight, can unblock you. So you could ask a question. If you'd like to do that, just put up your virtual hand and then she can unlock you. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Janie, and thanks for all of you for coming to this and for inviting me to speak. It's really an honor, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about penguins with you this evening. I wish we were all in the same room together and I could see whether you're bored or not and answer questions as we go and that sort of thing, but I'll do my best. I just want to say, Janie, thank you for that incredible introduction. You basically, my first few slides, you are sort of like not relevant anymore because you guys know all that about me now. I was going to introduce myself a little bit. But let me share my screen. The kind of mantra of our age. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see that? I'm assuming you can.
Yes, we can see.
And I'm gonna do the thing to let you guys see. Let's see if I can make it so you can see my cursor. Probably can't see it right now. This is working when we. Okay, my first technical difficulty of the evening. We'll just move along and see if we need to do it later. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. And the story that I want to talk about today is hopefully going to give you an idea about just both a story about climate change, which we've heard a lot of those stories, and often they're not good news. This isn't great news either, but it's kind of fascinating news the more that you kind of dig into the details and come to a kind of a richer understanding of how ecology changes in response to climate change. But also want to just say that I hope it also gives you a feel for just the beauty and splendor of a place that you may not get a chance to go to. Antarctica is just a fantastic environment and spectacle to be able to visit for a while. It really gets inside your heart. So I love to talk about Antarctica. I've made 3 trips to Antarctica and writing about science on all of them, and I just feel like those have been the real highlights of my life. So hopefully I can share that and get you as excited about that as I am. Just briefly, as Janie mentioned, these are my background slides that I don't have to tell you anymore. I work at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I edit the All About Birds website and do a bunch of other things for our website. It's a fantastic job. I really can't believe that I've had it for this long, and they still, let me do this work. It's really gratifying. I was brought up as a kid by my dad. I have 3 siblings. My dad was an obsessive bird watcher. There he is. That's my younger brother, actually, there, barely able to hold up his binoculars. But this was our childhood, going out and following my dad around. My 3 other siblings have all sworn off birds. They don't really ever want to see another bird. But with me, it stuck and really set me on a course for my whole life, which, very grateful to my dad, and also just want to give a shout out. You mentioned a longtime member of your club, and all of you people who are sharing your passion and your fascination with younger people. It really does pay off, and it really is a valuable thing. So thank you to everybody who does that. So yeah, I went off and I followed the science career, and then I became a science writer. And a few years after I sort of became a fully fledged science writer, I found myself going on the first of these 3 expeditions to Antarctica, and it was just this dream of, this is really happening. I'm a science writer. This is not a setup shot. I'm in Antarctica at 1 o'clock in the morning with the midnight sun shining in through this ice cave that I'm in. And I'm filing a dispatch that we're gonna send to the internet via a satellite phone before I get to go to sleep. And it was just thrilling to just be out in Antarctica and following scientists around all day long, and then coming back and writing about it into the wee hours and just living that whole experience. So this was, again, every time I've been to Antarctica has been a high point in my life. And I just feel, again, very lucky to be able to have pursued this. And one of my greatest strokes of luck, I have to say, was meeting this person, Chris Linder, who's just a fantastic photographer. And so the shot you saw at the beginning of the talk and this shot here, these are my shots. They're kind of sort of general, point the camera shots. But I'm going to be able to share with you for the rest of this talk almost entirely Chris Linder photos. And they're just gorgeous photos. And he's just a tremendously creative individual and hardworking and just great to work with. So I just want to give him a little bit of credit and just mention, if you are into photography or if you see his name somewhere, he's definitely somebody to pay attention to and really creates beautiful images. So what I want to talk about today is going to be sort of roughly arranged in this order. I'm talking about a change that's happened to the Antarctic Peninsula in the last 65 years, but that really accelerated in the last 30 years. And it involves these 2 penguin species. The Adelie, which is the one with the big white eye ring at the top, and the Gentoo, which is the one with the cool, blaze of white and the red bill. And so what I want to talk about, to set that up, I want to talk a little bit about penguins in general, because often we kind of lump penguins together into one, just a penguin's a penguin. But actually the sort of more subtle differences between penguins are really fascinating and actually have bring a lot to bear on the story. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you get to Antarctica, just again, because it helps to understand Antarctica a little bit more. It's a big place. And there's a couple of different aspects of the geography I want to talk about. And then we'll just go in and we'll look at the Adelie penguin, we'll look at the Gentoo penguin, and we'll understand how this change has happened on the Antarctic Peninsula, where what has happened essentially has been a wholesale replacement of Adelie penguins disappearing and Gentoo penguins taking their place. So that's the nutshell, but the details are what's really interesting and what I hope you'll enjoy hearing about tonight. Um, and we're all just going to try to answer this question. So get this picture in your head. We're going to come back to it at the end, of what's going on in this picture. You know, if you look at it, you can pretty quickly see there are two species of penguins here. Why is that? And what's the difference between these penguins? This Adelie in the middle, looking a little bit outnumbered, looking a little bit surrounded, and these gentoos just looking at and sizing up the Adelie. So that's what we're going to sort of try to sort of tease out today. Just a quick look at penguin life. You know, we tend to think about penguins as these beautiful, as these kind of adorable, cute, kind of bumbling little toddlers that wear tuxedos, and we see them everywhere in popular culture, and we kind of think we know all of these sort of characteristics about them, but almost all of those are wrong. And what I'd like to sort of swap out, oh yeah, I have this, let's just watch this little, this is to sort of illustrate this bumbling aspect that we just love. I'm sure you've seen pictures of penguins walking before, but you just never get tired of watching them with their flippers spread out and their little kind of toddling gait, and the way they just come around in packs, and there's always a straggler. And this is the kind of thing that makes us love penguins. And I love penguins, and I particularly love Adelie penguins. I just think that they're fantastic creatures. Don't mind my YouTube suggested shots here. But what I want to suggest is that actually penguins are these really committed, really capable animals that are living in a place where almost nothing else can live. And I feel like this picture of a whole bunch of penguins, these two in the foreground and a bunch in the background that you can see as little black specks, walking through almost a whiteout in a horizontal snow storm, just living their lives. And you know, when you get to see them day in and day out, it really brings home just sort of how intrepid these birds are. And so let's review why that is. So there's 18 species of penguins in the world. Here they are, and I won't try to name them all because I'll probably get some wrong. But one of our classic beliefs about penguins is that they live at the South Pole, and of course the South Pole is hundreds and hundreds of miles from any kind of coastline, and actually no penguins live in the South Pole. But in fact, most penguins don't even live in Antarctica. Most penguins are not hardy enough to make it in Antarctica proper. And in fact, only these 4 species here that I've circled really show up in Antarctica at all. The ones in blue, that's the emperor penguin and the Adelie penguin. Those species live all around the continent, the coastline of the continent of Antarctica, and they are the only ones that can really make a living there. Then the gentoo and the chinstrap, those ones circled in gray, they can make it to the Antarctic Peninsula. They can make it to the subantarctic islands. They might make it to a place like Cape Adair on the very northern part of the Antarctic continent. But they don't typically make it farther south than that. And the answer is, the reason why is just because it's such a brutal environment there. So when you look at it through that lens, particularly when you think about this little Adelie penguin here as being able to survive in a very rarefied place where very few vertebrates can survive. And they do it in droves. There's about 5 million breeding Adelie penguins in the world. And they form these giant colonies. So these are some researchers walking back towards their hut on Cape Crozier on Ross Island in Antarctica. And behind them, that sort of salt and pepper and tan color there is 1/3 of one of the largest Adelie penguin colonies in the world. There's about 150,000 pairs of Adelie penguins at this colony. And when you add up the pairs, the youngsters, and the non-breeding birds that are there, there's 500,000 penguins there every summer. So they're really, really successful, even in these really harsh environments. When you go in, this is what the researchers affectionately call the penguin superhighway at Cape Crozier, where as you might imagine, if you've got 500,000 penguins that have to get back and forth from their roosting or their nesting areas every day, it gets tramped down, and it's like a 6-lane highway. We always think it's cute that they follow apparently the American convention where they stay to the right on the way that they on the road, as opposed to the New Zealand convention where they're on the opposite sides. And they do this in order to raise their young, and they just will do whatever it takes to make it work. So obviously, a penguin needs a rocky area to make its nest, and it also needs a beach that it can come ashore on. And it just so happens that this giant cornice here is in between these penguins' nest and the place where they can get in the water at. So every day, multiple times a day, they will walk over this cornice in order to get from their feeding grounds to their nest. So these penguins are not lost here. This, again, if you think of penguins as cute and adorable, you might think how cute it is that they're going on a hike. But these are actually these totally committed parents that are trekking on these short legs, really long distances just to raise their young. And they'll do it in all types of weather. So, this blowing snow is just, and limited visibility is something that they just don't even, raise an eyebrow at. Bonus, if you see this snow petrel down here in just photobombing this picture, a beautiful seabird that also nests in Antarctica. And I just contrast this with the humans that are there studying them. This is, again, those same researchers that I showed you in the previous slide, and then me standing there talking on a satellite phone. We were out there in some of that same weather. We ended up in a whiteout. We got lost. We trekked out onto the Ross ice shelf because we were trying to find our way to a place we were trying to get to, and we realized we couldn't find it. And we actually called on satellite phone back to the United States to ask the directions that we could put in our GPS to get back to where we needed to go. That is how sort of like futile and like just incompetent humans are compared to Adelie penguins. And this is always just burned into my brain because we were never exactly scared because we had all this technology with us, but it was really something to realize we were out on an ice shelf and unable to see anything and had no idea when the weather was going to break. And yet Adelies are doing all this, and they're dealing with predators. So you probably know a lot of, or have heard at least a little bit about skuas. This is a South Polar skua that's just sitting right next to these penguin nests and waiting for some kind of mischief to develop. They're very mischievous birds. I'd love to give a talk about skuas. I also have a super soft spot for them, but we won't talk about that now. And also leopard seals, which you may have heard about, these really athletic and graceful seals that wait at the edge of the colony because they know those penguins have to dive into that water every day to go and get food for their kids, and they're waiting there, and they're going to try to eat one, and they're quite successful at it. This one of these actually bit a hole in our Zodiac when we were there on one of our trips to Antarctica, and deflated the one section of the Zodiac, which is just again that contrast between what Adelies are willing to do and what humans can manage is just always really impressive to me. So just to leave you with that, that's my view of, I hope that I can sort of change the narrative on penguins, and just look at this bird. This is a blizzard. Snow is accumulating. The wind is blowing. It's probably 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And we think, gosh, how hardy these birds are. And in fact, they're on the verge of sweating at this point. These birds are so capable of surviving cold temperatures that they just don't really like it a lot warmer than this. These birds may look like they're suffering here, but it's just another day in Antarctica for them. And I just think that, that has made a great impression on me. I guess you can probably tell that by now. That's my view of penguins. But just take a little aside here and talk about, well, how do you get to Antarctica anyway? And what's it look like when you're there? There's a little inset on the bottom left that's showing you a South Pole view of Antarctica. It looks a little bit like a rubber ducky. And if you can see my cursor, this is the Antarctic Peninsula here, that stretches actually a lot farther north than the rest of Antarctica. This is the corresponding place here. And there's two American stations that you tend to go to when you're doing research in Antarctica. They look kind of close together on this map, but it's just because of the scale. There's the Pacific Ocean in between them. So if you go to Palmer Station, you fly down south through to Santiago to Punta Arenas, Chile, and you get on an icebreaker. You go across the Drake Passage. It takes a week. And then you come down to the more or less the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. And you get here and you're just barely below the Antarctic Circle. So it's quite a bit warmer. And there's less of the midnight sun effect here. As it is if you go the other direction to McMurdo Station, in which case you fly to Los Angeles, then you fly to New Zealand, and then you take a plane and you fly to McMurdo because it's just too far to go to get to take a ship. I'll come back to this later, but this is important, the difference in latitude between 64 South and 77 or 78 South, where McMurdo is. That's about 800 miles, and it really has a difference in how climate change is playing out there. So just briefly, if you're going to McMurdo Station, which is the first of the places that I went to when I went there, you actually fly there on a C5 from Christchurch, New Zealand, and that's a plane that weighs 250 tons. And they land it on the sea ice. The sea ice is about 6 or 8 feet thick, and they land a 250-ton plane on it, and everything goes great. It's kind of mind-blowing. And then you get on a big tracked vehicle, and it takes you into this little kind of, it feels like a mining town. It's a big station. It's the biggest Antarctic station, and there's about 12 or 1,400 people there in the summertime, and about 200 people there in the wintertime. And there's barracks, there's, it's almost like an outdoor store, like a place that will get you outfitted for everything you need to do to go camping out in the wilderness there or on the glaciers. There's like a bowling alley and places to keep you occupied if you're just working there for months on end. There's also a dock. Here's an icebreaker here, the Nathaniel B. Palmer, that's getting ready to go out and do some work out here in the Ross Sea. And if there are any Antarctica buffs here, history buffs, Captain Scott, who was the person who the Englishman who tragically died in 1912 on his way back from the South Pole after getting beat there by Roald Amundsen. He made a trip there in 1901, and this is his hut, this little speck of tan out here at the edge of this point here. This was the hut that he stayed in. So there's a lot of history in this spot, and it's really kind of a thrilling place to go to. This is where a lot of those early, what's called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, that's where a lot of this stuff was based, because this is actually the southernmost open water in the world. There's no place you can go farther south in the oceans than here. And then from there, you take a helicopter. If you're lucky enough to go to some place like Cape Crozier, it's about 40 miles by helicopter from McMurdo Station. And then you're out there in this pristine environment where very few people get to go at all. And only about 4 or 5 people there at any one time. And they're living in this, you go to sleep in a tent that looks like this. And then you work and cook and like have downtime and look at data and stuff in this thing, which is just a modified shipping container that you walk in the door. But when you walk out the door, you're just greeted with this incredible scene of sea ice and sometimes surfacing whales. You can hear the penguins just around the corner down over in this direction. And it's just a tremendous environment. And this is far enough south that when I was there, I never saw the sun get anywhere close to the horizon. It's just 24 hours of daylight. Okay, so to get to Palmer, like I said, it's a different experience. It's actually harder to get to Palmer than it is to get to McMurdo because you have to get on a ship for a week. There's no airstrip at Palmer. So you get on an icebreaker like this one, and you go across the Drake Passage, which is famous for being rough. And I just wanted to give you an idea of this with this scale that we were in. on one of my trips there. So there's a lot of swell here. This is a 300-foot ship. Where I'm standing is 60 feet above the waterline, and you're just getting pummeled by these waves that just are sending the spray up and over, and and this actually knocked me off my feet. I was just holding my iPhone up here, just trying to record the scene because it was very dramatic, and I just completely lost it. So that's what's famous about that's what the Drake Passage is famous for. And the people that go to Antarctica are very lucky, and the scientists that go there and make their careers are very hardworking, and they just put up with a lot. I just wanted to get that sort of little tidbit in there. And when you get to Palmer Station, there's only about 4 buildings at the Palmer Station. There's only about 30 people there at any one time at the most. And most people are there for the summer season for a few months at a time. Like I said, it's just below the Antarctic Circle. So this is sort of probably 1 or 2 in the morning here. So it's this, if you've ever been someplace in the high latitudes, you know what this kind of twilight looks like, but pretty soon it's going to start getting light again. And then in the daytime, it's just this beautiful landscape with a lot of icebergs in the distance and tall mountains and penguins everywhere. And just a lot of work to be done. One thing I want to talk about here and just sort of segue into is something that will become important later, which is understanding the different kinds of ice that you see in the, and there's really basically 3 main kinds of ice. There's icebergs, and just to recap those, as you probably know, that's fresh water that froze on a glacier and then calved somewhere and then started floating around for months or probably years as they slowly disintegrate. And these things are not really that useful to penguins because most of them are steep-sided and the penguins can't really get on them and do anything sort of as a routine. When icebergs break up, they form these great big fields of what's called brash ice. And I liken it to sort of like motoring around in a big old glass of Coke, because it's like these little chunks of ice that all form up together, and then you have to sort of chunk your way through it. And depending on what the wind's doing, the wind is very temperamental, and it'll either push all this ice together and make it really hard to get through, and then 15 minutes later it might switch around and then completely change the orientation of that ice. But this is again fresh water, and it's just slowly melting in the cold water here. And then there's sea ice. And then sea ice is seawater that has frozen because of the cold winters. And Antarctica basically doubles in size every year between summer and winter because the sea ice recedes in the summertime and then just grows way far out again. And like I say, it doubles the land area of Antarctica in sea ice. And then slowly in the summertime, that breaks up and forms ice floes that float out over the ocean. And this is really important, particularly for Adelies. Adelie penguins, this is really their habitat. I can show you pictures of them on their nests on land, but they're really only there when they're raising chicks. Most of the year, they're standing on ice floes or they're swimming underneath the ice floes and foraging for krill. So sea ice is super important for Adelie penguins, and they're actually a migratory bird. They migrate with the seasons following the sea ice, so that they can, because that's how they forage. Whereas Gen 2 penguins, as we'll see later, just don't do that. And I just wanted to throw this in as a little bit of scale. So icebergs are just totally beautiful and abstract and gargantuan. And so luckily, this is one of the magic photos by Chris Linder. You can see the humpback whale tail there in the lower left there, just for scale. That's a humpback whale. That's an iceberg. And just to, breathtaking. Okay, I hope you're all doing fine, and I wish I could say, ask me any questions or anything, but we'll just have to wait till the end. So we'll move on. And what I want to do now is just look a little bit more into Adelie biology, and then we'll look a little more into Gen 2 biology. There's a famous, as famous as penguin biologists get, famous penguin biologist, I'll show you a picture of him in a minute, who said this about I call this the indomitable Adelie. And like I say, I love Adelies, and they really make an impression on me. But it's not just me. So this is something that he wrote in a book. David Ainley wrote in a book. After some 22 trips to Antarctica and its surrounding oceans, no one thing embodies the spirit of the Antarctic struggle more than the Adelie penguin. Against incredible odds, this little warm-blooded creature survives only by being supremely adapted, knowing what is important, and doing whatever is needed, always with amazingly defiant energy. And I just love that as a tribute to the Adelie, and as a science writer who often has to translate very, abstruse scientific language. I just love that this scientist was able to capture this in this way, and in such such lovely terms. So this is down on Ross Island near McMurdo Station at a place called Cape Royds, where this person, David Ainley on the left, has been coming. He wrote his PhD dissertation on Adelie penguins in 1968. And I don't think he's still going there now, but when I was so my last trip to Antarctica was 2015, and he was still going there then. So this is a person who has spent a long time studying and thinking about Adelies. And Jean Pennycook, the woman on the right there, who was a longtime outreach coordinator for him, or somebody that went down there and just helped get information out to school programs and things like that. And I just want to just pause here, and I'll pause again with the Gentoos, just to give a little bit of acknowledgement to these scientists who dedicate their lives and just come to know these animals with such intimacy and just have a lot of insight about them. It's just one of the greatest things about being a science writer, is just getting to be close to these people. So when you're studying out here in the field, a lot of it is just good old field biology. You get out there with your binoculars and you walk around and you watch what the birds are doing, and you try to figure out ways to measure things like what's their nest success, how long do they live, how much food do they bring back, and that sort of thing. And that's what Ainley's been doing for a long time. These colonies can get really big, and counting them can be a challenge. And we'll just go up one more level here. This is about a third of that Cape Crozier colony there. And you can imagine you can't really count every single penguin in 125,000 penguins, penguin pairs. So they divide up the colony, and they call these little areas here subcolonies. They're stained tan, as you can probably guess, because that's all their poop that is stained the ground around them. And so they'll make a map of these areas, and then they'll study some of these areas and then use that as a sample that they can draw inferences about the rest of the population. I just want to see if I can play a sound of what a colony sounds like, because it's just tremendously loud, and again, it's 24 hours of daylight, and the penguins never stop with their activity. So here we go. Here's the sound of some penguins at a penguin colony. So that's just a whole bunch of adult penguins making a racket, greeting each other or chasing other penguins off. And then you might hear right there just these little tiny high-pitched peeps. And I love that sound. That's the sound of the little chicks. At this point, they're about a week old, and they are just peeping, and they're just barely penetrating through the sound of those, that just incredibly loud sound of the adults. And obviously, they're saying they're hungry, just like any other baby animal. So that's sort of, hopefully can give you an idea of the sort of chaos of a penguin colony. I'll also just briefly mention that penguin colonies are extremely stinky places. It's just like you walk through a penguin colony and you kind of have to just tell your mind to calm down. Like the assault on your nose is just so, it's just spectacular. You have to try to think of it that way, because it's just a lot of penguin poop, and a lot of penguin urine, and then also the smell of a lot of penguin, food that's been thrown up, but the chicks have missed it. And so it's kind of like a very sun-baked old shrimp kind of a smell. And so all of that together makes this penguin colony, any penguin colony, just an overwhelming sensory experience. Let's just say that. Okay. Yeah, I got one more neat. So many of you may have heard the story about how penguins, and particularly Adelie penguins, will make nests out of rocks, and then the male's job is to go and find a bunch of the right sized rocks and put them together into a nest, and then that will hopefully attract a mate. And most of that is true, and it's kind of interesting because rocks the rocks of a particular size are a limited resource, and these penguins have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so most of those rocks have been found already. And so I don't know how many people in the audience have heard about the incidents of penguins stealing rocks from other penguins, but it does happen. Gentoos do the same thing. And I got lucky and I captured this image of a Gentoo walking over to this spot. Oh, look at these nice rocks. This rock will be perfect in my nest. And nobody's around. What a coincidence. And like I say, I had a GoPro on here, so I wasn't here. I wasn't disturbing these birds while this was happening. And I came back and reviewed the footage later, and I realized what this bird was doing. It's actually stealing rocks from another penguin's nest, and it's having so much success. The other penguins are looking around going like, is he really doing that? I don't know if they're thinking maybe ought to give it a try or not, but it's apparently going so well that the penguin can actually start to be a little bit choosy, and start to like, I got away with these three. Let's see what I can, let's see if there's a really good rock around here somewhere. But all the good things have to come to an end. And I just love this moment here. He's like, maybe not that one. Maybe I'll get this one. Yeah. Oh, no. He's like, who, me? I was just admiring your yard, because he's watched this other penguin come up, and then he's going to get shown the door. And now this one is probably going to take an inventory and see how many rocks are gone. So if you ever found yourself in a conversation with with your friends sometime, about whether that's real, I've heard that the rocks are a big commodity. It's true, and you've actually now seen it. So I hope you enjoy that. Okay, so back to Adelie's. I believe it's around the last week of December, the eggs hatch, and these birds hatch. These penguin chicks hatch. There's usually two. They usually hatch at about 100 grams, or about 3 ounces. And now their goal is to add 100 grams of weight every single day for the next 40 days. And that's the challenge ahead of the parents. They have to, dump enough krill or fish into these penguins' mouths to get them up to 4 kilograms, or about 10 pounds, before the Antarctic summer is over and the winter starts to set in. And so it's a race against time. And this is something that's really shaped Adelie life history, that I'll talk about a little bit later. But these, because they nest so far south, they have a really short window. And so they have to be really on it from the very moment that they start trying to nest. And Adelies will live on average about 12 years, out on the outside, maybe 25 years for a really old Adelie penguin. And when it'll take them about 5, 6, 7 years to even get old enough and competent enough to try to start nesting. And then they'll find a mate, and they will typically stay together, that male and that female, for as long as either one of them is alive. And it's because they have to really work in clockwork. They really have to trade off on nest duties, trade off on foraging duties, and they have to really hit the ground running when they arrive, fix their nest up, lay eggs, and then incubate them, and so on. And there's just no time to waste. And so many young penguins in their first nesting attempts, they just can't get it together soon enough. And there's no margin for error. It's very, very difficult, and it takes a long time to learn for these Adelies. Now, the field biologists in studying them also do the classic mark recapture studies. So like if you've ever been to a banding station, which it's a similar thing with penguins, they use flipper tags. And then they can know an individual and they can follow it through its life. And then they also have been very clever, and they've put together around a few colonies. They're able to sort of fence the colony in, and then provide the penguins with one way in and one way out. And this is something the penguins adapt to really quickly. They just learn the way out, and they're like, this is fine. But then what they'll do is they'll embed a scale in that little area. This is called a way bridge that they'll walk across. And they have a little RFID tag, which is like your Easy Pass tag, that is just safely injected under the skin. It's about the size of a grain of rice on a few of these penguins. And then every time they walk out, you know who walked out, and you know how much they weigh. And they walk back in, you know who came back in, how much they weigh, how long they've been gone, how much food they brought back from their weight. And then obviously if they walk back out again, you know how much weight they lost. Now you know roughly how much they gave to their chicks. So it's really this really clever way of getting a lot of data about how these birds actually pull off this feat of getting their chicks raised on time. And then there's also another subset of birds that will get a radio transmitter attached just for 24 hours, and then they'll track them and see where they go. And these are actually satellite transmitters, so they can see where they go and how deep they dive and things like that. And when you put all that together, you learn some really amazing things about Adelis. This is two of these researchers, Viola Toniolo and Grant Ballard, who are longtime Adelie researchers, and they're looking at a graph of one of those tags that just came back. Here's a set of tags here in the foreground. And so just so you can get an idea of what this data looks like. So this particular bird in 32 hours, it was out for 32 hours. It made 522 dives in that time. It spent 11 hours swimming at its deepest depth. The average depth was about 42 meters, so about 130, 140 feet. And that's the average depth. Spend 11 hours at that depth, and they traveled 150 kilometers on the surface of the water, round trip to get back. So again, just a little window into how these are just endurance athletes and just tremendously capable animals that are just doing an amazing amount of work to raise their young. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about Gen2s. And as I said, Gen2s are not normally on the Antarctic Peninsula, except for at the very, very tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. You can actually find them on the Falkland Islands or on the South American mainland, like the Argentinian mainland. That's as far north as they go. So they're actually really adapted to what's called a subantarctic climate, not an Antarctic climate. Again, to talk about the researchers, this is Donna Fraser, who has studied Adelie penguins for more than 30 years, and her husband, Bill Fraser, who started studying them in the 70s. They've just recently retired, but they have, again, this long history of understanding and studying and understanding these birds. And Donna Fraser was actually I think she was the first person to find Gen2 penguins when they arrived at Palmer Station, so that station that I talked about on the Antarctic Peninsula, where Gen2 penguins had never nested before. And she found the first 14 nests in 1993, I believe. And ever since then, that number of Gen2 penguins on the Palmer Station has been growing, and they've watched that happen. So Palmer is a really dramatic place, and everywhere you go, you get there by Zodiac and dodging leopard seals, and then come up onto the beach, and then you get to roam around a Gen2 colony. And this is an interesting place because there's Gen2s and Adelies that live at this spot here. This is called Biscoe Point. Most places, pretty much every other place in Palmer, the Adelies are separate from the Gen2s, and they're not sort of real close to each other. You're doing a lot of the same work here as they were doing with Adelies at Cape Crozier in the last section that I talked about. You got these super cute Gen2 chicks, but you've got the same challenge of getting these birds to get up to be big, healthy, adult-sized penguins in a relatively short amount of time. Although Gen2s have about a month longer because of the latitude that they're at. And so they tend to have a rather more relaxed way of going about their breeding activities. And so that allows them to just be a little bit more flexible about how they time their nesting. For instance, if you have a snowstorm come in, or it rains, or the conditions aren't good for nesting, a gentoo can afford to wait, whereas an Adelie is kind of hardwired and programmed not to wait, even if it means a poor nesting attempt. And I just want to pause and say I just love the little seam here on the both Adelies and gentoos. It just looks that much more like a stuffed animal. That's just a little place where the feather tracts come together, but it's just so cute. So as a scientist, here they are at this is Donna and another field tech named Aaron at Biscoe Point. But as you can see, they're in an Adelie colony here, and there's gentoos sort of like 100 meters away. And scientists, when you see two animals living together, one of the first things that they want to know is, well, what's different about these two species? And it's really actually fascinating that to sort of explore that a little bit more. And you do it the same way. You pick, what they're doing here is they're picking out a penguin that they're going to do the same kinds of measurements, and a few of them they'll put those satellite transmitters on and learn all of these things about where they're going and how successful they are. So here's Donna measuring a gentoo penguin. And to cut a long story short, both Adelies and gentoos eat mainly these two animals. This is krill, which you've probably heard about since you were in 4th grade, because it's what drives the food chain of the Arctic regions. Humpback whales eat a lot of these. All the whales eat a lot of these, and also a lot of Adelies and gentoos eat a lot of this. They eat this Antarctic silverfish a lot too, if they can get it. These aren't to scale here. The krill is about the size of a big piece of macaroni, and this is a few inches long fish, so it's a bigger meal, and I think they prefer it when they can get it. But krill is definitely a bedrock part of their diet. I wrote an article about this for our magazine, and we had this really nice illustration done by a really talented artist. Just to give you an idea about if you put them next to each other, gentoos are bigger, they have longer necks. This is actually the 3rd biggest species of penguin in the world. The king and the emperor are the 2 biggest. And then this is the 3rd, and it outweighs by about 50% the Adelie. They've got longer flippers, a thinner bill that maybe helps them catch different food differently. By contrast, Adelies, the super insulated bill, these shorter flippers. And what this does is mean that Adelie, as I mentioned, forage underneath the sea ice. So they stand on the sea ice, soak up the sun, dive into the water, go under the sea ice where a lot of krill nurseries are, and swim around there, and they can hold their breath longer than gentoo penguins can, and they can stay under that sea ice longer and do more foraging. Gentoo penguins like open water, and they can dive deeper than Adelie penguins. So the interesting story here is that this is not a story of competition where Adelies are getting pushed out by birds that are coming in, and the gentoos are not taking their nest sites, and they're not taking food from the same places that Adelie get them. They just are living here kind of in parallel, but gentoos are more successful at it in Palmer Station now in this new regime we're in. So just to recap, gentoo penguins, deep divers, long flippers help them get down deep and spend longer down there. Adelies really tied to sea ice and able to forage under the sea ice very effectively. And so when you put all of that together and you study these birds for 30 years, like Donna Fraser has done, I won't go through this, but these are Adelie penguin numbers in blue, and there's just one spot at Palmer Station. Still, there's only one spot at Palmer Station where gentoos nest, this place called Biscoe Point, which is off the map. And what you'll see is that in every place, Adelie penguins have dropped significantly. I mean, just like through the floor, while gentoos showed up in 1993. And these are 2014 numbers to 3,600. They've just exploded in the same area. So what we're seeing is kind of a changing of the guard. and so this is what it looks like on a graph. I knew uh, I knew I was giving this talk to you, and so I actually made not really an updated version, but I got in touch with a scientist that I know, Megan Semino, who's now taken over the penguin work at Palmer, and just got her to tell me what are the numbers now. So this is what you were looking at on the previous slide, where in red you're seeing the crash of Adelie penguin populations from 14,000 or 15,000 breeding pairs in the 70s and 80s down to just over 2,000 in 2014, and now down to about 1,000 left in 2023. In the meantime, the black line is the gentoos. So here's where they first appear in 1993. This is when Donna walked up and to check her Adelies on Biscoe Point and said, wow, there's 14 gentoo penguin nests here. And then it just started going and kept going. And so 3,500 in 2014, 6,000 now in 2023, 6,000 pairs. And so there's really nothing more clear I mean, we see lots and lots of climate change stories now, and that's not good news. But some of those are complicated stories. This is a very clear story of a change that has happened that seems to be brought about by climate change. So to come back to that picture that I showed you early on, what's going on here? Now that we've kind of reviewed some differences between these penguins' lifestyles and understand this change in climate and the effect it's had, it's as clear as can be. And I'm realizing I forgot to tell you like some numbers about the climate change. I'm just waving my hands about climate change, but Palmer Station has warmed about 12 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 60 years. It's one of the fastest warming places on the planet. In general, the poles tend to be faster warming areas, but if you can imagine what it means to warm 12 degrees in 60 years on average, I wanted to also tell you this. This is where Palmer Station is on this little point of land here. This is one of the big penguin colonies, Torgerson Island, which is about a half mile away across open water. And in 1993, they used to ski. In the beginning of the season, they used to ski across this water to get to the colony because they couldn't take the Zodiac because it was sea ice. And now the Palmer area is sea ice free for 100 days, 3 months longer than it used to be in the 90s and the 80s. So no longer can you, when I came down to Palmer Station and spent 6 weeks there, I did not see a single bit of sea ice. Another interesting little tidbit is that in the 70s, when they set up Palmer Station, the glacier, this is roughly where the edge of the glacier is, the glacier was right out their back door. It was about 120 feet from the back door, and they piped meltwater in to drink. They just had a pipe that collecting meltwater, go in there, they'd drink out of it. And now it's a quarter mile away. It's retreated about 25 feet every year for the last 30 years. And at some point they had to install a desalination plant because it just wasn't feasible to drink meltwater anymore. And so I feel like those sort of like little anecdotes can really paint a picture of something that is a very slow change, but a very big and kind of momentous change. So what we're seeing here is just this, the ground literally shifting, almost literally shifting underneath the feet of these penguins. What used to be an Antarctic climate that was well suited for Adelies, with short summers and lots of sea ice, has turned into a subantarctic climate with longer summers, more rain. It does rain here at Palmer, and that's why these birds get so kind of gross looking. This poor little awkward phase Adelie chick that's just covered in wet mud. But now there's more open water, and there's longer summers that allows gentoos to just make a better living. Like I said, you shouldn't underestimate the importance of it, the gentoo being able to come to the colony, assess whether it's a good time to nest, maybe wait a couple weeks, and then start nesting and this is something that's served it well in its subantarctic environment. Adelies are much more used to, okay, we got to get with the program. We've only got about 120 days to do this whole thing, and so they just start nesting. And if there's 12 inches of snow on the ground and they're trying to, lay their eggs on top of that, they'll do that. And that has not served them well at Palmer. So just to wrap up here, I think a lot of people, it's fun. It's useful to think of the climate system as a Rube Goldberg machine, a place where there's lots and lots of inputs and there's lots of things that modify how, a simple, essentially rise in CO2 ends up with major changes happening in ecosystems. And then in this case, you've got CO2 emissions happening at one end, and at the other end of this very, very long Rube Goldberg machine, you've got an army of tuxedo-wearing penguins just storming south from along the Antarctic Peninsula and finding new places to live that are just essentially perfect for them. And at the same time, you've got these adelies that are seeing an end of an era at Palmer Station. And this is a photo, a really poignant photo of a young Adelie penguin, might have fledged from this colony here 10 years ago, but this colony no longer exists. And it was coming back. Penguins are very site faithful. It's coming back and it's picking up a rock. It's thinking about where it might nest, but there is not going to be a colony here. There's not going to be a mate coming to this island to try to start nesting here. That, like I say, it's the end of an era. And so that's it's very sobering to see this play out so directly and so clearly right in front of us. I don't want to make it into a total tragedy. Adelies are still one of the most numerous penguin species, and Antarctica is a big place. And like I said, just for comparison, at Palmer Station, you've still got about 800 miles due south. If you're just looking at how far south McMurdo, Ross Island, Cape Crozier are, that's about 800 miles. That's about the difference between Salem and Jacksonville, Florida. And if you think about that climate difference, things are still fine for adelies. As a matter of fact, at Cape Crozier, way down here at 78 degrees, that colony is growing. So it's not that there's a wholesale, like it's not adelies are not about to go extinct. But when you look at that local level, it really teaches you lessons about how animals respond to climate change. And the thing that, just comes back, stronger than anything is that if this is happening in the most remote and least human altered ecosystem that exists on Earth, Antarctica, then it's happening everywhere. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but it just is it's very sobering. And Gentoos are the winners here at Palmer, and for them the rules changed. And when the rules change, then you got to look around and look for what's the new set of winners that's gonna move in. For adelies, the rules changed at Palmer, and when the rules change enough, your last recourse is to move. And adelies are really good at that, as we've seen how mobile they are and how hardy they are. But the thing that comes back to me, especially flying back from Antarctica and coming back to a very populated place where humans are, is it is a lot harder for humans to move than it is for penguins to move. And that is the thing that I feel has not been communicated or has not sunk in as well as it could have for people. So I hope that's not too sad of a note to end on. Humans are very resourceful creatures. We have a lot of ingenuity and technology, and we will have we will deal with this in some way or another. But it is a major, major challenge. And thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. And I'd be happy to yield the floor at this point. I was going to say thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. you covered a lot of ground there, and sorry we couldn't be there, like giving you the live reactions as you were going through, because I know I was laughing at specific moments and gasping at other times.
Great.
So first of
Well,
all, I want to thank you
thanks for sticking with me.
all the way. And we definitely have had some questions come in. An interesting one about avian bird flu, and you may not know the answer to this, but and I'm sorry if I'm getting your, maybe Jim, you know, Michaela, is it Michelle or Mikhail?
Yeah,
Sorry,
Michelle. Yeah.
Michelle, good. So Michelle Larkins is asking that they've heard that over 200 penguin chicks, Gentoo, she believes, have died of avian flu in the Falklands colonies. And so she's wondering if there's been any evidence of avian flu showing up in Antarctica. Do you know?
That's a great question, and it's really worrying. I don't know. I've been following this story. I didn't realize that the number was as high as 200 at this point in the Falklands. Falklands obviously are a long way from Antarctica. They're just sort of, east off the coast of Argentina. But yes, it's very concerning. And I mean, the really concerning part is that most of Antarctica, there's not a lot of humans there, and it's very difficult to monitor it. So you would have to have it happen at one of the colonies where there are people doing work, and then they would have to see the dead, penguin, and then they would have to do some tests. So I don't believe it's been reported from Antarctica yet. What would have to happen, obviously, is some migratory bird like an Antarctic tern or a Wilson's storm petrel or something like that would have to get it, fly to Antarctica, and then give it to maybe something like a skua that would scavenge it, and then that would pass, something like that, some scenario like that. But it's reached almost everywhere else, and so it is very worrying because of the way that it just can kind of rip through many different kinds of birds.
And this may also be something that would be hard for you to answer just based on what you said, but I was curious if with the warming that's happening to the north, is there any indication that the Adelie colonies are getting larger further south, or just aren't there the researchers there?
No, yes, that's a very good question. Yes, they are. In some places, I mean, there's lots of things that make populations change and grow and shrink. But like that big colony, Cape Crozier, which it's kind of perennially switching places with another colony called Cape Adare, which is the largest colony in the world. And Cape Crozier has been growing. And that's, like I say, at the very, very southernmost place where any Adelies or any other birds nest. And that is probably because the conditions are getting better there. David Ainley mentioned it to me in a funny way. He's like, yes, it's warming down here, but that means that the average temperature is minus 21 instead of minus 24, something like that. So yeah, that's the short answer, is that what's happening is the Adelies are just getting driven south, and there's still, fortunately, a fair amount of kind of cushion, because there's still a lot farther south they can go. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about the concerns about birds and other animals that live on mountains, and as it gets warmer, they get pushed into these smaller and smaller areas, and eventually you're going to hit the end of the mountain, and that's an issue for more temperate species. This is a similar issue, but fortunately, there's a lot of room. Antarctica is still very cold on the continent. So,
has anyone done the extrapolation to say, oh, wait a minute, if things continue at this rate, Adelies have 125 years to live?
They've definitely done that with emperors, and there was a paper that got a lot of attention because it was about emperor penguins, and it was very pessimistic. Obviously, one of the issues with those models is this huge amount of uncertainty into what's actually going to happen in the future. But I think the headline or the main finding for that emperor penguin study was emperor penguins may be largely extinct by, there's a lot of couching, but largely extinct by 2100. They're really, really limited by sea ice because they actually don't come on land to lay their nests. I'm sure you've seen March of the Penguins. So they actually even make their nest on the sea ice. And so it's sort of dependent on that, And yeah, I'll stop it there.
And it appeared that you were getting these nestings where the gentoos and the adelies are nesting in the same areas, but do they use the same sort of nesting areas ordinarily, or is that just kind of almost unexpected
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, it is unexpected. That's a good question. Gentoos, they, it's kind of a special situation there at Biscoe Point in Palmer, where adelies are still hanging on. And they both make those rock nests. They both need clear, snow-free areas to make their nests. And so they can nest in those same places. But the rest of their ecology, gentoos like to stay closer to the colony. They don't migrate the way adelies do. So adelies get done at the end of their nesting season. They just go off and they follow the sea ice. Gentoos like to find places where there's good currents and open water. So I think it's kind of a coincidence that they're nesting in that same place and it works for both of them, although it's working less well for adelies as time goes by. But it's sort of more to do with their ecology.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I see a couple of questions in the Q&A section. Jared Kais asked about projections of loss of adelie habitat, which I think was sort of indirectly answered. But both Jared and Elsa Lawrence are asking about the krill population and whether there are changes that are happening on the surface are also happening below, and what it's doing to the krill population, and how that's affecting the organisms that feed on them.
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, there is so much work being done on krill, and it's for a very good reason. Obviously, it's driving that whole ecosystem. Almost everything is eating krill, and guess what? It's complicated. So for one thing, I mentioned that sea ice is like a krill nursery. So underneath the sea ice, algae often grows, and then the krill will kind of have a nursery down there. And so as you lose sea ice, you lose those krill nurseries, and that affects krill populations. And I can't say more than that about sort of the mechanistic things. There's a couple of other interesting things that are happening. So one is maybe a surprise. It's the legacy of whaling. We took most of the whales out of the ocean, and those whales ate a lot of krill. So there's almost like a surplus, kind of like there's a surplus of wine in France because there's so many wineries, right? At that time, there's just krill are just pumping out krill, and there's the whales are not there to eat it. And so we're kind of coasting off a period of very high krill abundance. And now climate is changing. And then, of course, as you probably also know, there's a huge krill fishery now because people do things like collect a whole bunch of krill and then feed it to farmed salmon so you can grow big, robust salmon, or they make, omega-3 supplements or dog food and cat food out of it. And I don't know the scale of the krill fishery, but it is massive. So that's the broad outlines of the krill population.
Robert Buxbaum is asking about the actual mechanism that allows the Gentoo to outcompete the adelies. Or is it not? I think you suggested it wasn't competition.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad you asked that. And I don't know how well I can clarify it other than to say that one of the things that Donna and her team has been doing is looking for competition. And there's ways that you can, so there's, when you look at competition, you say, well, are they competing for nest sites? So like you talked about a bluebird trail at the beginning of the session, right? And I don't know if anybody has seen like house sparrows or European starlings taking out bluebirds and taking over the nest boxes and kicking them out, or tree swallows and bluebirds will fight over nest boxes. That's a form of competition. But we're not seeing that with gentoos. So gentoos are coming into the area, but they're not kicking adelies off of their islands. They're nesting alongside them or on in different areas. So nest site competition is not happening. And then when they follow the birds and see where they're going to forage, they also don't see that there's like a competition. Like for instance, if you're looking at a carcass with a bunch of vultures and eagles at it, in Africa or something like that, and there's a big pecking order and there's competition there for who gets access to that resource. And that doesn't seem to be happening there either. Adelies are going under the sea ice, or they're going off farther away, or they're staying shallower, and the gentoos are going to the deep water and the open water. And so as the best they can tell, it's not competition. It's just two species living side by side, and the environment is limiting how successful adelies can be. And and at the same time, it's sort of rewarding gentoos, or it's just those conditions are good for gentoos, and so gentoos are being more successful there. I hope that helps explain.
Well, thank you, Hugh. It's getting close to 9 o'clock. We should probably wrap up, and I've got an announcement. Janie, did you have anything else?
No, that was fabulous, Hugh. Thank you
Sorry
so
to
much.
interrupt. I just don't want, we have one person's hand up and I don't want them to go unnoticed
Oh,
before we wrap
yeah,
up.
thank you. Didn't see that,
Of
so.
course, no problem. Linda, I'm gonna unmute you in just 1 second.
Fisher is asking where the recording will be posted. You can find it from the website.
Yep, and it'll also be, yes, on the PEM website as well as the ECOC webpage.
Looks like folks are headed out. I'm happy to stay and talk to Linda, answer Linda's question. I just want to, if you are leaving, thank you so much for being here for this presentation, and thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And thanks for the great questions.
I just want to announce our next meeting. An important announcement. Number one, it'll be a fascinating talk by David Moon about Plum Island and restoring the marsh for the birds. You may have heard that they're making significant changes in the coming years to Plum Island, which has been controversial, but there are pros and cons, and David will speak to those. An important point is that the date has changed. So if you mark your calendar for March 1st, it is now going to be March 8th. So please make a note of that so that you can catch this presentation.
Yes, and that's been updated on the ECOC webpage. So it'll be an in-person program with a hybrid option for the ECOC folks. So you have that information ahead of time. And certainly some great compliments, Hugh, on your presentation here. And so yes, the sensory overload is one I'll remember too, about your description of the Adelie colony. It must be quite something.
Yeah, it's hard to, you think you're overdoing it, but man, when you smell that, it is yeah. So anyway, sorry, I should leave it there.
And Linda, sorry you weren't able to ask your question. But
That's
and
right.
Hugh, you're available. I know you have a site that people can reach you at the Cornell, so someone could follow up.
Sure, yeah. We have a staff directory at the birds.cornell.edu, our main website, and I'm happy to have anybody contact me if you have any questions.
Fantastic. All right. Well, great evening. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be thinking of you, Hugh, and your ongoing work, and thanks for all you're doing at Cornell.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Good night, everybody.
Bye now.
Everybody.